All right, so we're good to go. Welcome to this talk about ERINI versus Knative. If I had to rephrase the title of the talk, I would maybe take away the versus because it's not a real precise comparison. A few words about myself. I'm the poorly shaved guy on the left side. I'm always happy when I'm in the mountains riding motorcycles, being under the sky and thinking about technology, and most of the time coming back to it when I return. So I'm CEO of a company called anynines, and among platform plannings and operations, we also do data service automation for a living. And when the entire Cloud Foundry experience was a bit influenced by that Kubernetes thing that gained a lot of momentum in the past, I want to say month or 1 or 2 years, I came back to a fake Albert Einstein quote that says, "All I want to see of push, the rest are details." So I think Jules said this wonderful sentence. We had all those talks, will it blend, did it blend, how blended it? I really like that sentence. I think we are a bit beyond that. At the same time, I'm also very interested in looking at those particular projects. For example, ERINI for me seems to be a valid choice for anybody who has sympathy for Cloud Foundry to take this heritage and translate it into a Kubernetes world. At the same time, there's a momentum from an ecosystem that not necessarily shares those emotions about this heritage, and maybe look at it as a legacy. So I'm dedicating this talk mostly to reflect the thoughts I had. So, as I said, it's not a precise comparison. Maybe Germans will understand the sign language down there, but the whole point is that it is an opinionated talk, and there are a lot of unanswered questions in the talk. But at the same time, I'd like to at least point out my view about how these technologies could relate to another. But it's up to you to agree or disagree, and we'll have comments and questions after that. I usually extend my talks so much that there's no room for discontent in the end, and you can find and beat me in front of our booth later on, or rage using social media. So every form of aggression is welcome. Just kidding. We're peaceful here. All right, so I would say, to make things simple, that ERINI has the potential to be a platform, or it is a platform. It basically gives you a Cloud Foundry with Kubernetes as a backend, and as such, it will serve the purpose that large organizations will actually seek when looking at a platform to improve their developers' experience. Now, with Knative, there's a difference, because if you look into the Knative project, you will see that it actually has a similar topic. It's also about taking Kubernetes and improving the way applications are exposed to the end user, and to some degree, it also improves the developer experience. But rather than providing you with a feeling that you're dealing with a platform, it is what the Kubernetes ecosystem does with all their projects. It's a building block. And there are two different ways of looking at technology. So that's what I'm saying, is this ERINI versus Knative is absolutely a catchphrase for getting a talk, but it's basically not really a point to make in a talk when you really go deeper into the topic. So all I'm trying to say, or to convince you, is in the end that the title is misleading, and for a reason that is actually good for all of you and me. So if we consent on that at the end of the talk, I'm happy, right? And I always try to be happy. So what do they have in common? I'm now pointing to a talk that was given by Dr. Nick and Dr. Max a few months ago where they picked the user experience of deploying an app to Cloud Foundry on one hand, so there was not a ERINI comparison, but a Cloud Foundry versus Knative comparison. And Dr. Nick and Dr. Max, they were both representing Cloud Foundry, one and the other one Knative. And they pointed out that it is basically possible to deploy and manage applications with both of these technologies. So that shouldn't be so much surprising, but I really recommend to look and watch that talk. I think it's about 25 minutes, and as every talk of Dr. Nick, it's quite entertaining. Infotainment, I would say. So you can deploy an application, and you can scale them, you can add routes, you can restart them, and you can do logging and debugging by SSHing into the containers. You can somehow use services, for example, using the service catalog, or using Helm or operators. You have some degree of multi-tenancy with slight differences. So in this comparison, to our surprise, Cloud Foundry scored a bit higher than Knative. And I think the point is fair. If what you want is running applications, you rather go with the Cloud Foundry than you go with the Knative, unless you are building a platform and you're looking for particular components that are more flexible and that you can arrange more freely, then you'd rather go with Knative. So the entire point of the slide is they both can do it, but they are not the same. In general, you can say that through Kubernetes that both will do provide you with means to manage your cluster resources. So basically what you do, you add a bunch of VMs or physical servers, and you can then slice them up with containers and therefore put tinier workloads that are smaller than your virtual machines across the cluster. I think one of the big pros and cons of Cloud Foundry was always that it had this heritage from being, I wouldn't say it's a Heroku copycat, or it was in the beginning. No, I'm not saying that, right? But if you took that idea, then you'll see that there was the 12-factor manifest, which was quite opinionated about the state of the application. And while this is absolutely right to encourage developers to take care that state is stored in proper backing services, I mean, I'm saying that offering a set of data services under the anynines data services, accepting that fundamental challenge in the 12-factor manifest. At the same time, I think we have to face the fact that a lot of companies are sitting on, well, let's say, applications that are somehow close to 12 factors, but they are not quite 12-factor compliant. So to me, the decision to introduce state as persistent volumes into containers in Kubernetes was a right choice. But as all those, let's say, feared that when you do that, there will be a flood of people misunderstanding that stateful set and will put databases on it, this is exactly what happened. So I would say both make sense, but with every sword that has two edges, you can cut yourself deeply. So the next thing you'll get is this declarative API to describe your workload. I mean, pretty similar to BOSH or Cloud Foundry, but just that it's somehow in between. So there's another talk I will give at 3 p.m. that will look at the question on whether Kubernetes is the better OpenStack, see how Kubernetes somehow cannibalizes infrastructure APIs, but that's a different topic. So, ERINI. What is ERINI? I'm sure that I'm not the right person to go into the details of that, so there are better people in the room. Jules will answer those questions, I think, happily. So all I can do is provide you with my at least perspective. I would say that, and I'm a Cloud Foundry enthusiast, I started in 2012 with it, and I would say that ERINI, it takes the soul of Cloud Foundry. It accepts the spirit of Cloud Foundry. The people who do ERINI, they came from the Cloud Foundry ecosystem. They are not foreigners trying to take away what's ours. They will provide us with something that actually is a Cloud Foundry. So, if you take the Cloud Foundry stack, And this maybe, just for illustrative purpose, it may not be correct in every detail, but you take some of the components away and replace them or add others, and you will still use a lot of the components of the Cloud Foundry runtime and turn it into something that uses Kubernetes for container orchestration. Now, it does something, and it does it with an elegance that I really respect, because it introduces what they call OPI. If you are German, you know that OP is a grandpa, so my sense of humor. But it stands for Orchestration Provider Interface. So if you've been into the Cloud Foundry ecosystem, you will see that the BOSH has a CPI, which is a cloud provider interface, encapsulating elementary functions of infrastructure APIs so that you don't have to care about them anymore. So you take BOSH, you set them up on vSphere, you set them up on OpenStack, you set it up on Amazon's API, and what you'll get is the ability to deploy BOSH workloads. So this abstraction, we have a similar thing with our generic service broker, so it's called the SPI, and ERINI introduces the same for orchestration providers. So take ERINI, and you'll get a Cloud Foundry that uses Kubernetes, but you can also, for example, create a Diego OPI so that you don't have to perceive ERINI as the enemy to classical Cloud Foundry, but it actually represents the evolutionary next step, to just be aware that things are changing and that we need to embrace that change or we will perish. So in my opinion, this is a duck typing problem, in the sense that if it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, then it must be a duck. And in this case, ERINI walks like a Cloud Foundry, it talks like a Cloud Foundry, so it must be a Cloud Foundry. We will see at the end that KF, a project from Google, it either talks or walks like a Cloud Foundry, but it does only one of them, because it behaves like a Cloud Foundry, but if you look closer, it's Knative, so it's not a Cloud Foundry, right? At least to some degree. So I would say ERINI has the spirit of Cloud Foundry built in. You don't have to fear ERINI. Whenever ERINI comes, and whenever ERINI may become the new standard, I will embrace it, because it will also provide a transition for large workloads that are already in the enterprise to at some point move to Kubernetes. Well, this is a decision on whether you do that or when you will do that. That is absolutely up to you. But I think it is likely that you want to have the ability to do so. So I think if ERINI becomes the new standard in Cloud Foundry, we'll have that path and we are prepared for it, and we should be. And we can all leave that depressed state we've been in for the last month. Oh, Cloud Foundry is going away. It's not. So Kubernetes as the default orchestrator, orchestrators will be pluggable, and it can represent a path to Kubernetes. A few words about Knative, and I'm surely not a professional Kubernetes, and neither a Knative expert. But what I can say is that using bare Kubernetes requires a tremendous amount of Kubernetes skills, and it also includes a lot of wasteful tasks. Well, you could argue about that, because a CF push, I mean, it's holy to most of the Cloud Foundry enthusiasts, but it also can be frustrating, as it requires a certain amount of knowledge, and whenever something goes wrong in the staging of an app, especially when the build pack is applied, it can be frustrating to find the error. However, if you are a large enterprise, build packs give you the ability to governance and to ensure that developers use runtime that has passed a certain quality control. And the entire user experience that the Cloud Foundry gives is something that's quite unique to it. And there's nothing that really lives up to that standard to this point. Maybe there will, but I think we're not there. So Knative is a step towards operating applications on Kubernetes more easily, but it's not going the last mile. Yeah, we have some time left. It's interesting to substantiate my claims by looking into Knative and see how this is actually a fact or just an opinion. So if you look at Knative in version 0.6 or before, you see that there are three components in there. There's the build component, the eventing component, and the serving component. And the build component does actually do what you might expect. It transforms source code into container images. So, spoiler alert, this thing has been deprecated in 0.7 and has been removed in 0.8. I linked an issue that will guide you through that proposal and the reasoning in depth. But the point I was trying to make is substantiating the claim that this is not a platform, because now you need an external component to reproduce that user journey that you'll have naturally with ERINI. And you'll have to introduce something like Tecton pipelines or whatever else is there doing a similar job. So the question, what is ERINI not, is definitely, it's not a platform. It's a building block and not a solution. However, it does have some very interesting features. So it has a lot of momentum, not for no reason. It has it for a reason, and the reason, I think, is beside of the serverless, well, we don't need containers or whatever, we just have function as code and stuff. I think that event-driven architectures and serverless are two major trends in software design. Well, I know buzzword scores going up steeply, but you get the point. I mean, we're doing that for a reason, and it also about how would you deal with events and loose coupling of many systems, as neither of the cloud technology has so far claimed the entire cloud space. It is introducing a lot of heterogeneity, and how would you deal with that in the long run? And I would say finding interfaces and standards that help those systems to collaborate more easily is a step into the right direction, and I think eventing is a great approach to loosely coupled systems. So CloudEvents is a specification for describing event data, and it provides interoperability. In Knative eventing, well, they actually introduce a system that's quite interesting. So you have something that emits events of several types. You have channels that will also persist and ensure that the transport is done correctly. And it can also bridge several protocols if necessary, so that the eventing system becomes more comprehensive. So you can see that some of the sources of events here, GitHub and cronjob, are just examples on events that you may want to respond to. So just to give you a few words, so as I said, our mission is to create automation for data services. And I see the future in data services also adapting Kubernetes. Once they have solved the container isolation issue, which I think is still a showstopper, the eventing system may allow you to respond to, let's say, a disk that's about to get full with an auto-scaling service that can be loosely attached to the data service automation. So things like that may be enabled with eventing, so it's worth having a look at it. Knative serving, I mean, that's about container images and putting them into application instances. It's basically taking your container image and give it a go. Interestingly, it has built-in auto-scaling and also scales to 0. So it is what you'd expect from something that tries to be an Amazon Lambda-like experience, where you deploy a little function that will be wrapped in a container image, and then you want to execute that application code as often as necessary, and scale down, freeing the resources if you don't need it anymore. So I think there's value in that. And it does that by, well, all those extensions of Kubernetes use one of the facilities of Kubernetes, which is to introduce custom resource definitions. And those custom resources basically tell Kubernetes with their corresponding controllers on how to actually do that. And those controllers often translate things into other more native elements of Kubernetes. So there are several of them introduced in Knative, such as the service, which has configuration and routes attached to that. The routes pointing to URIs, it's all a bit simplifying, but you'll get the idea. And configurations. Now, one thing that Cloud Foundry does not have, at least not to this point, I'd say, is revisions, so that you can basically go back and to point to a certain deployment that you'll had in a certain time and point, including the combination of code and config. So there are funny things possible that, for example, you can do A/B testing or anything like that, where you can split your traffic and serve, well, let's say, route a certain amount of traffic to one revision where the other amounts will be routed to another revision. So that's quite interesting. And, well, a few words about the user experience. I'd say that you see, you're cloning basically some code, and then you're creating a service YAML file, and well, I would say that's not a Cloud Foundry experience. Well, you do CF push, and then I'm like, but who writes manifest, right? The manifest YAML is also a YAML file, but YAML is so wrong. Why would you write YAML code, right? But well, that's the way how you talk to Knative. So, however, you basically specify your container, which you give that thing a name, you say about the namespace, and then you go build your container images, push your container to the registry, and then apply this whole thing to Kubernetes. So you do a lot of things that actually would be usually done in the staging process. So I'd say if you really want to compare something to ERINI, then that's not exactly it, because it leaves out a lot of the things that ERINI will do for you. It's not as opinionated as ERINI is, but it also doesn't the same job. So it uses, Knative uses Kubernetes as the container orchestrator, as you would guess. It is native to the Kubernetes community, and I think it's one of the fastest growing components in the Kubernetes ecosystem, if I'm informed correctly. I heard this one, never checked that statement. So scaling to 0 is possible. It has auto scaling. The eventing capabilities I find interesting in particular. Maybe there was something else doing the same thing and I would like it more, but so far that could be interesting. But it's not an application developer solution. I can't state that often enough. If you take one thing away, then it's that statement. Now, we have to be fair and say that ERINI is not the only project that does a Cloud Foundry push experience, and there's KF. And KF has the mission to be fully compatible with Cloud Foundry, including buildpacks and logs and manifests and routing and service brokers and all so on. And it is built entirely on Knative, Kubernetes, and Tekton. You know, the thing that we all swapped the default build block from the Knative stack with. And it also supports GitOps, so it must be awesome, or not. However, at this point, it does not support organization. So you're basically trapped in one org. If you have a small Kubernetes cluster and you want to replace it with something that feels like a Cloud Foundry, but maybe doesn't, it talks like a Cloud Foundry, but it doesn't walk like a Cloud Foundry because it actually walks like a Knative, then KF is for you. And if space is enough for you, then KF might be interesting. So the user experience, and I'm not showing this entirely, but you'll see that the KF command line utility basically imitates the CF push experience. Now, why would you do that? Is a question that I'm asking myself. Now, if we use metaphors and we take it all very personally, well, then Kubernetes comes and takes away our Diego, or it takes away our BOSH, right? And now it wants to take away our ERINI. And I would say now it's enough, right? It's enough of taking away. We'll do ERINI, go home, KF. But, well, we see. I think we have to see where it gets, but definitely more in the ERINI. You might guess that, but. So ERINI, we are now coming to those opinionated statements I was repeating throughout the talk. So ERINI is a path to Kubernetes while maintaining the Cloud Foundry spirit. So if you're a Cloud Foundry guy, you can go upright into the Kubernetes era with using ERINI. And I keep on misspelling that on slides. I have done the substitution like 100 times, right? So please also buy this domain, just for me. I think it brings you an enterprise-grade path for Kubernetes. It's rock solid, and I really would make bets on it. Knative is a building block, as I said. The event processing is interesting. The function as a service abilities and put things like that on top is interesting. However, I was a bit disappointed because I had a Hello World program written in Go. I was hitting the cold start of that function. It took like an eternity to start up. And I was like, 30 seconds for function as a code? It's not function as a code. It's not serverless if it doesn't work within under a second. I need 250 milliseconds round trip, not waking up anything, right? So I think they will get there, but for so long, I think it's a bit of a marketing claim though, because we're not there yet. So Knative, lots of momentum from the Kubernetes ecosystem, and you know how it is with momentum. There could be this one thing that does the job right, and the other thing that's popular, and guess who wins? I wouldn't conclude Knative is winning, because I think we have Cloud Foundry in a lot of enterprises, and I think Cloud Foundry has been shaped by enterprises quite a lot, and whatever BOSH and Cloud Foundry has already achieved, Kubernetes yet has to get there. Because a technology that comes bottom up from the developers, from the crowd, with a lot of attention, has not the same maturity in it as a technology that has been shaped by real-world applications in real-world large corporates. So I would say those things blending together will bring something to the world that is better than anything we had before. That's my optimism. And I think KF is going the last mile and taking Knative to become a friendly and to have a friendly user experience. So if you want to put it together, Cloud Foundry and ERINI is for apps, Knative is for something like Lambda functions and event-driven cloud architectures maybe. Yeah, if you have a Cloud Foundry and you're sitting on top of it in your large corporate enterprise, well, ERINI I would say, makes the race. If you are Kubernetes, you have a mid-sized company, you have one Kubernetes cluster, and you want to have, the CF push experience for a few apps, maybe KF is for you. But you'll have to figure out yourself. Now, stopping my opinionation in this room, opening for your statements and questions, they were very welcome. Thank you for your attention so far.